thank you both for joining us. Definitely adding a whole nother layer of depth to the conference and the content, and I know that everyone certainly values that. So we'll go back to Twitter for Q&A, and we'll work through some questions from the audience. Actually, the first question I have, which is kind of funny that it's the first question I have, is other than legalization and cannabis activism, or other than digital technology, what issue do you care about the most?
I would have to say the war on drugs, generally. I've got some fairly wide experience with drugs. I will tell you, I've never had a drug experience I didn't like. That includes LSD, magic mushrooms, or a variety of things. But I'm well read about the drugs I have taken, and I've taken them in deliberate moderation for special occasions.
Yeah.
But I would have to say, it's a mean-spirited thing that we have done through our governments to punish people for the things they do to their own bodies, and making it so difficult for them to access these drugs by creating criminal cartels, because that's what legislation, the net effect is the government invented gangs, they invented cartels, and now this plague of armed, dangerous people are loose upon the whole earth. We've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands, perhaps even a couple of million people acting as armed thugs within gangs, fueled by the money they're making from illegal drugs, which we could eliminate with a stroke of the pen of getting rid of this horrible government policy. So when I see countries being destabilized, like Colombia, a country I really love, it's a beautiful place and they have peace now, and I hope they can keep it. I hope the Americans stay away. America did terrible things to South America. When you travel there and realize the reason everybody's afraid of prison is because of all the right-wing dictatorships that existed there for decades at the behest of the United States government. That's true in Uruguay, which has legal marijuana now, but Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, and so on it goes. And you realize that a lot of them in South America are still waking up from this nightmare, this fear of these dictatorships and the disappearances that go on. So I would say the war on drugs has facilitated narco-trafficking that supports governments, that supports these armed gangs and cartels. Just 60,000 people alone in Mexico who died during Calderon's period of 2006 to 2014. That's a staggering amount of people to be murdered, executed, killed by the government, killed by cartels, killed by people unknown, not to mention the horrible rapes and carnage that's gone on throughout Mexico. And that's just one country. There are many others that have experienced similar catastrophes, like Guatemala,
It's
Honduras.
almost unfathomable, the level, when you look at the figures, when someone says 60,000 people, and you look at other conflicts around the world where people were up in arms and became passionate about, where just across the border in the United States, 60,000 people passed.
Well, and here's the thing, Americans should feel responsible for that. Those drugs are all headed to the United States. They feed a U.S. market. The legislators in the United States know that this is a byproduct of the war on drugs, but they don't care because they're brown people. They're not largely white people. They're not people anybody knows or cares about. So this terrible dismissive disregard we have for so many other cultures on earth, as we see the way we pursue the war on drugs.
And Jan, how about yourself? What's an issue outside of what you do that you're particularly passionate about?
Well, what we do in Prague is that we are trying to educate people in digital technologies. And the reason for that is that we are trying to balance the authoritarian tendencies of governments. So for me, I agree that the war on drugs is terrible, and it's a no-brainer that we should stop the war on drugs. But I would broaden the area on all the victimless crimes. So because victimless crimes are something that shows us how governments have grown far more than they should, and they are punishing us for stuff that doesn't hurt anyone. So that's something that we are trying to balance in Czech Republic, and it's something that I'm passionate about because it's so clear that it's wrong on these cases.
Using digital technology to fight the nanny state or the paternalists who want to who want to tax soft drinks and overtax anything considered bad for you and make certain substances illegal.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Sure. Yep. All right, so back to Twitter here. The next question I have is for Marc. What do you recommend? So you talk a lot about civil disobedience, and we're both from Canada, and there are institutions there in Canada. What do you recommend for young activists who maybe don't have some of the luxuries that we have in Canada in terms of civil disobedience? How can they affect change, given that legal institutions and courts and the prison system in some of these other countries isn't set up the same way?
Well, you have to, first of all, you have to do something you love. So I would recommend that if you've got a passion for music, write songs of liberation and sing them. And if you've got a passion for business, like I did when I was very young, become an entrepreneur and use your money. I mean, I made a lot of money very young in my life, and I've been able to devote a lot of it to, like, for example, I didn't get a chance to say that when I sold those seeds, one of the things I did is sold seeds to Americans, and they sent me millions of dollars. And over a 10-year period, but I was able to give $5 million to ballot initiatives, referenda, all sorts of things. I mean, I'm the unknown funder for the 1998 Washington, D.C. Medical Marijuana Initiative, the 2000 Colorado Medical Initiative, the 2000 Arizona one, various ones in Alaska. And no one knows to this day that those initiatives were largely funded with illegal money taken by a Canadian in the mail and then funneled back to the United States to gather signatures for ballot initiatives. So, you know, you can do... I was having such a fun time laundering all that money for liberty. And that's what I would say, launder money for liberty. Like, you know, it's one thing to buy prostitutes and drugs and go on trips, but man, I had so much fun having my ballot initiatives put on a U.S. ballot. Millions of Americans voted on it, all because of money I got illegally that they sent me in the mail for seeds. So that was a great trip. So I would say that you should have fun being a revolutionary in whatever you have a talent and a passion for. Yeah. I'm good with business, and I'm good at speaking. I'm good in retail, so that's what I do. I was selling these ideas, selling people on capitalism, and encouraging them to become good entrepreneurs, and they'll have a career for life.
Yeah. Well, thank you for for laundering for liberty.
That's right.
Jan, this next question is for you. So from your point of view, outside of finance, which industry do you think will be the most influenced by blockchain technology, and how is that going to affect society?
Well, first of all, I don't think that blockchain is the most important piece of technology.
Okay.
I don't like when people talk about blockchain, but they disregard cryptocurrencies. It doesn't make any sense. So Bitcoin works because it uses blockchain, but blockchain wouldn't work without Bitcoin. It's like two parts that fit together. Finance is only the first application of blockchain and Bitcoin. And what blockchain is, that it's the ultimate trust machine, you could say. It's a single source of trust where you can save information into blockchain, and you can be sure that no one is editing the information, no one is deleting information, and so on. So what you can use this technology for, except finance, is, for example, notary services. You can do various registries on blockchain. You can automate lots of social processes using blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And I think that obviously finance is the simplest of them all. Yeah. And first, we will see transformation of finance, and once that is complete, it will spread into other areas.
Yeah. Okay, great. My next question is actually for both of you, respectively, based on your passions. But we'll start with Marc. Where do you see cannabis legalization in 5 years? And that I'm assuming the premise of that question is global.
Well, the good thing is that the citizens around the world are being convinced. For example, when I started in 1990, we were at 16% approval in the polls for legalizing cannabis. Well, now it's 2018, and in Canada it's about 68%. So, you know, an older generation, by and large, has died off, which was where the principal opposition was coming from. And this continues to be the phenomena, is that younger people, by and large, fully embrace legalization, and that's how we're going to get more substances legal, because younger people, I think, are more open to the truth and less to the propaganda. And so I see that becoming more positive. But actually, we cannot trust the governments. Their legalization is being put in place by the same people who despised us, the same people who ran this pogrom for 50 years, arresting millions and millions of people around the world, are going to be put in charge of these legalizations like in Canada. And they want to totally subvert them. They still are behaving in a condescending manner. There are still many, many punishments. The governments in Canada are trying to monopolize the sale of cannabis. They're trying to take away our culture and put it into their hands, and so they can make it boring, uninteresting, not fun. The real reason most people smoke marijuana is because it makes everything in life more fun. That's why I smoke it. So the idea that the government would sell it in its sterile, overtaxed, overregulated, condescending, patronizing, actually disgusted with us kind of thing is just too big an irony to accept, and that we're going to see a lot of this around the world, where big corporations and moneyed entities are going to get these exclusive licenses by various government to provide these medical extracts to be sold to the people at prohibition prices. Yeah. In a totally legal environment, marijuana should be kind of worthless. That's what I fought all these years. So we would be no longer criminalized, we would no longer be stigmatized, it would be normalized. Yep. Basically, the government would just take marijuana out of the schedule, literally one word, take cannabis out of the schedule, and say, now please obey all reasonable rules and regulations. Yeah. And that's it. Instead, they passed a thing called the Cannabis Act, which is 300 pages of new regulations, new punishments, new onerous regulations that can't be met by ordinary people. And the net upshot is they're handing our industry to wealthy stock market companies who have no relationship to cannabis, and still continuing to criminalize the entire cannabis culture, and making us buy from government, buy from corporations, but we can't grow ourselves, we can't sell it ourselves. By the way, just to show you that there's a big demand, I never did say, I sold $7 million of cannabis in one little store in the gay village in Toronto in 6.5 months. And by the time that the police came, we were selling $1 million every 2 weeks, just to show you the huge demand for just marijuana in one little store in Toronto.
Yeah, that really puts
That's why I didn't need you to pay for my airfare and my hotel.
And Jan, for you, in terms of cryptocurrencies, where do you see the use or the progression of cryptocurrencies in, let's say, 5 years?
Oh, that's a tough question, because Bitcoin is only 9 years old now, and it's something that we call exponential technology, because the rate of adoption and even consequently the price and the whole development of the technology grows exponentially. So that's something that humans are not really familiar with. Well, they should be, because nature is usually exponential, but people are not used to thinking exponentially. They think linearly. So I could maybe say something where it would be in 5 years, but it most likely would be stupid, what I would say here.
We can come back in 5 years and revisit it.
Considering where the technology went in the last 5 years, I think that we have a huge potential for cryptocurrencies to be like a general tool that people use in 5 years.
Like to make purchases, like everyday transactions?
Yeah. It's almost possible even now in some countries. In Czech Republic, you don't even need a bank account, and you already can live on cryptocurrencies. It's a bit difficult now, but it's possible. And in 5 years, I guess it will be kind of normal that you use cryptocurrencies for lots of your needs if you want to. Not everyone will do that, but it should be very easy to do in 5 years, because that's a really long time for exponential technology to bring new inventions and to penetrate the society with its use cases and so on.
I just want to add, you can bring positivity to wherever you are. When people say, man, I wouldn't want to go to jail, I'm so grateful I went to jail, and for many reasons, but one of them was this. In my prison, when I got there was a very loud man who used to be very loud, a black man, about the basketball games and the football games. And I later found out, I'd noticed him, his name was Nate. And Nate was doing life without parole. So many Americans get life for 99 grams of cocaine, which is a very small amount of crack cocaine. And he got life without parole. One day I'm reading that Attorney General Holder is going to have a program where people can get clemency, and you have to apply. And the rules were straight enough. You have to be nonviolent offender who's been sentenced to more than 20 years and who's done already 10 years at least. So I went to Nate. I said, Nate, you have no violence in your history, right? He says, yes. I said, well, you know, the Attorney General, he has this program where you should apply for clemency and maybe you get it. He says, I do this every year, nothing ever happens. I said, yeah, but Nate, I think they're actually serious. And he said, I'll tell you what, if you do this with me, because I said it's a lot of paperwork, he said, if you do it with me, then I will send it in. So I spent the next 2 weeks going over his whole record, applying and sending a letter to President Obama for executive clemency, and I was pretty cynical too. But you know what? A year and a half ago, on July 2016, Nate Carter, that very same fellow, calls me from prison and says, Mark, I got a letter from the president today. I'm going to be released in 2 months. And I said, really, Nate, that's fabulous. He says, yeah, Mark, there's no other conditions. I've been granted executive clemency. So God bless you for making me do that, because otherwise I'd be spending the rest of my life here. And he calls me every 3 weeks now to bless me and just to remind me that he loves life. He says, I love being free, Mark. I love life. I couldn't have a sweeter existence with my family here in Memphis, Tennessee. And he says, and I just want to thank you again, as I'm always going to thank you for the rest of my life. So these are great things that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have been in prison. So, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of a mystical element to our experiences, that maybe we're meant to be there, and that something great can happen no matter where we are.
Certainly helping others break out of what is just an absolute disgusting system. So that's to hear a story like that is extremely heartwarming to see that there are some people who are getting their day in court, or justice, if we want to call it that.
And also a gift that keeps on giving, that these things are happening after I'm released, that good things are coming from my time spent there. And basically, I'm very much a believer, what goes around comes around. We get back what we put out into the universe. So
awesome. Well, actually, the last question I have, because we do have to close, it is for you, Mark, and it's probably one of the funnier questions I've seen. What was it like to smoke marijuana with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
Well, no, that's a funny thing, too, because he's since denied that, as he'd have to, because he's changed his whole way of looking at everything. But it was in August 2004. We had just spoken at Idea City the previous June. He happens to have a common friend, Canada's most famous astrophysicist, Jamie Matthews, loves hashish as I do. So anyway, he was friends with who is now the Prime Minister, and another friend of mine, Laura St. John, a violinist, famous violinist. So the four of us had lunch one afternoon, and we spent several hours smoking joints on the patio of a restaurant, and the Prime Minister then was very much like a not familiar toker. He'd go kind of like someone who's doing it for the first time, but he had probably done it a few times. But anyway, so I smoked pot with him, but he's since been really upset about that I bring it up all the time. So...
All right, well, I mean, for both of you, you both are fighting for a freer future in very different ways, but it is very much appreciated by everybody here. Thank you so much for joining us at the conference. We really appreciate it. Everyone give them a warm round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.